All right. So today we are going to talk about the United States and World War II. Again, this is one of those topics that I talk about a lot. I've spent a lot of time studying. This is kind of my specialty, something I've focused my career around. Basically, my book, right? You see, my book is about women pilots in World War II, American women pilots in World War II. It's on sale on Amazon if you want to go get it and support your independent bookstore, all of that. But uh, so this is the hardest topic for me to teach because I know too much about it. I teach an entire course, the United States in World War II. I teach a second course, the world in World War II. So it's one of those things that I'm going to work really hard to keep this um, very brief for you and give you lots of opportunities to ask questions and talk to me about it, and give you other sources to read more about stuff. But uh, one of the things about this time period is it's such a global experience, and I can't emphasize that enough. We learn a lot about this from the American perspective. We're whether it's Pearl Harbor or the invasion of Normandy with films like Saving Private Ryan and others. And most of the Hollywood films that we watch about it are from the American perspective. But it's really important to recognize the global aspect of World War II. It really is a world war. We're again this war of the empires where the Germans are fighting, but they're fighting in France, they're fighting in North Africa, they're fighting, in the Middle East, around the world, Italy. The Japanese are fighting, but they're fighting everywhere. The Chinese are fighting. Everyone is fighting. There just aren't any countries except maybe Switzerland that are out of this war, and Switzerland's involved. Holding the money and the materials of all the countries, but especially the Germans. So when you learn about World War II, be sure to think of it in that perspective, and hopefully you'll read more about it. And there's a lot of really good documentaries that are now out there. You can find a number of them on Netflix and Amazon Prime that are just really, really interesting and dynamic. Some are very sensationalist, but some are really factual and good. So be sure to take a good look at all of those. Um, well, one of the things that I'm going to do is back up in time because that's what I do. So I'm going to get us back to the United States in World War II. Um, and I made just a really brief PowerPoint, just really simple, some images for you, just so we could have a good look at those together. Um, this is kind of backing us up a little bit back to the beginning of World War One, just because I think it's important to realize what we're talking about. This war in the 1940s, right? 1939 is when the war starts in Europe. Of course, the United States doesn't get technically involved until 1941, but I just want you to remember how quickly all these changes are occurring. So this is the map of Europe in 1914, which is, just 25 years earlier than the beginning of World War II. And this is what it looks like with this giant Russian Empire, which of course took over Finland, all of Poland, Ukraine, Czechoslovakia, all of this territory, this giant Germany, Austria-Hungary, that Ottoman Empire existed down here. And of course, many of these countries have empires. Much of Africa is controlled by the French, by the Germans, by the Dutch, all these European powers that are controlling much of Europe. And then in Asia, I don't have a map of Asia, but it's the same, right? Lots of European powers and controlling places like French Indochina, which is Vietnam, and different things like that. So this is the map just 25 years before the beginning of World War II. Of course, this is the map in 1919, at the end of World War II, after the Treaty of Versailles. And again, just a reminder, you can see how dramatically the map is going to change in this region here, right? Eastern Europe, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and then you move forward and wow, what a different map, right? Finland's independent, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, none of that exists on the map before, right? So this map is 1929. So just, or excuse me, 1919. So 20 years later, these countries are all at war. 20 years later, this is a global conflict. So think about the instability that is going on in Europe, this entire interwar period, this time from 1919 to 1939, how unstable it is. It's recovering from war. It's recovering from literally millions of people being killed during this conflict. It's recovering from that global pandemic of influenza, which I hope you all watched that film. 20 million people die worldwide from the influenza pandemic in this period. So Europe is recovering from that. The world is recovering from that as well. You've got this dramatic shift in an entirely new government in Germany. Austro-Hungarian Empire is gone. You've got this little Austria, this little Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. This whole part of the map is redrawn. And then look here, you've got, instead of the Russian Empire, you now have all these Eastern European countries, and you have the USSR, the Soviet Union, which is a completely different entity, communist nation, led by ruthless leaders. The Russian Empire is gone. So this is an incredibly unstable period. And then you've got to remember the fact that this is a period of global instability because of the Great Depression. So the Great Depression hits the United States in 1929, as we learned about in the last module, and it's going to hit Europe as well, where you had, remember at the end of World War I, that Treaty of Versailles, part of that treaty was those reparations, where the Germans were supposed to pay the French and the British and other allies for the cost of the war. Well, the United States in the 1920s invests in Germany and puts money into German businesses and things like that. Germany's economy starts to recover in the early years of the 1920s and starts paying back France and Britain. France and Britain start to get a little more stable, but they're all just teetering on the edge. The United States collapses in 1929, and we bring the rest of the world down with us, all the way from Japan and China to Europe. Germany falls in on itself. So the Great Depression isn't just in the United States. The Great Depression is global, and that is going to cause even more instability in countries like Germany, in Italy, which is an independent nation as well. It becomes controlled by the dictator Mussolini in the early 1920s. A young man named Adolf Hitler is a great admirer of Mussolini. Hitler in Germany is able to use the bitterness that the German people had about that Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I, that idea that they somehow were to blame for the war and the millions of deaths it caused worldwide. He was able to tap into that frustration and anger and bitterness. And then the awful reality of the Great Depression, the economy being so horrible in Germany. And of course, he has a scapegoat. He blames the Jewish people of the world, and especially of Germany, of being the problem and the source of the problem for all of this. And so, all of this gets mixed up where, Adolf Hitler gets into power in Germany in the spring of 1933, right at the same time that Franklin Roosevelt is taking over in the United States. So there's this kind of parallel path of power of Adolf Hitler and Franklin Roosevelt. They are very different people, very, very different people, but they both get into control in January and in March of 1933. And then, of course, they're both going to die within a month of each other. FDR will die in April of 1945. Hitler commits suicide around the same time, within a couple of weeks. So this reality of, that 1930s time period in Europe is so important to leading us into the war. One of the tools that Hitler uses, Germany is one of the first nations to get out of the Great Depression. One of the tools that Hitler uses is he spends, he spools up the German economy by investing vast amounts of money into rebuilding the military, building roads across Germany so wide enough for the tanks and the trucks that they're going to need to fight the war. So they're building thousands of planes and tanks and trucks and guns, all during the 1930s, all when it was illegal for them to do so based on the laws of the Treaty of Versailles. And in the United States, our response to Germany doing this and taking over some of the territory they had gained from France and all of these things that Germany was doing in the 1930s, the American response to this is to declare neutrality. There are a series of neutrality laws in the United States, 1936, 1937, 1938, where we put laws on the books. Congress says, you know what? We got sucked into one European war. We are not doing it again. As early as 1935, 1936, everybody could see what was happening. Everybody could see where Hitler was going. And the United States said, we are not getting involved again. It is not going to happen. And we just slowly stand to the side as we watch Europe drifting toward another violent and horrific war. I think it's really important to remember too that on the other side of the world, in Asia, Japan is moving very quickly in an aggressive manner. Japan is working very quickly, and this is a further map, but I want to show you this. Japan has been taking parts of Manchuria, parts of China, as early as 1932 and 1933. And they are being much more aggressive because they are very mad about the fact that they were treated so poorly in the Treaty of Versailles, that they were disrespected in the 1924 Immigration Quota Act, where Japan was excluded from any immigration into the United States based on racism of Woodrow Wilson and others in the Congress at the time. And it gives the power to the militarists, those who wanted a stronger, more military-oriented Japan. So throughout the 1920s and the 1930s, Japan is becoming more and more aggressive as well. Again, invading China as early as 1932, 1933 in the Manchurian Peninsula. And the United States is watching all of this, right? We're watching what's going on in Japan. We've been allies with China for some time, even though the United States was racist against Chinese immigrants coming to the United States. We'd seen China as an ally, in large part because we wanted to trade with China. So we're watching what's going on between Japan and China. We're watching what's going on in Germany. We're declaring we're neutral in all of it, while at the same time trying to balance it and control it and influence Germany, influence Japan, trying to get them to not be aggressive against their neighbors. So layer this reality of 1930s foreign policy on top of what you already know about the Great Depression and the New Deal and the work that Franklin Roosevelt and Congress was doing with that. And it just really complicates the reality of 1930s United States. And again, I do hope that you'll read more about all of this. Right. So the war in Europe begins. And, most nations date the beginning of World War II in September of 1939. Germany had been aggressive towards other nations. They had already taken over Austria. If any of you have seen The Sound of Music, right? There's that scene when the Nazis take over Austria, and there were some of the Austrians that supported it, right? The girl's boyfriend Rolf and all of that, but others opposed it, like the captain and Maria and blah blah, right? And these are the Swiss Alps that they've climbed over to escape and to be free, and etc. Right? So Germany had already done that. They had done that a couple of years earlier. Germany had already taken parts of Czechoslovakia in Europe as well. And then in September of 1939, they move into Poland. And they very quickly are able to take Poland as well. So we look at this new map, and you can see this red line shows here. Let me get myself out of the way of the key there, right? You could see this red line. So by 1941, Germany has taken over this whole red line here, right? They've taken over most of Poland, and the Soviets had actually taken over the other side of it, but that's a complicated story. And they had expanded their territory greatly, right? From this to this. And then war was declared, right? Great Britain and France were, allies with Poland. When Germany finally invaded Poland, they said, okay, now we're all at war. Germany was like, awesome, we're ready to go. They had allied themselves with Italy and with Japan in the Pacific. That's the Axis powers. They went to war. The Soviet Union was initially neutral until Germany stupidly decided to turn against them and invade. So this is what the map of Europe looks like by December of 1941, when of course the United States is going to get involved. You can see that the Germans were winning. They had defeated France in June of 1940. They had taken over Norway. They had gotten deep into the Soviet Union, not quite to Moscow, but they had taken over this entire region. Turkey was neutral. They had taken over North Africa. Libya was controlled by Italy, but they had taken over Algeria and Morocco. If you think of the film Casablanca, which is here in Morocco, which had been controlled by the French, but when the Germans defeat the French in June of 1940, they're able to take all this territory. So I know I'm going through a lot of this fast. This is all just background. This is pre the United States getting involved in the war. And this is what's going on in Europe. So this is what Europe looks like when the United States finally gets involved in the war. And of course, we get involved because of Japan. We were leaning towards the war very much so. And most Americans were expecting to get into the war by the summer of 1941. We thought we'd be declaring war against Germany. The Japanese, of course, and let me move my little picture out of the way here. The Japanese, of course, took a great gamble in December of 1941. They'd been negotiating with the United States. The United States had been very harsh against Japan because of their invasions of China. The United States had finally issued sanctions against Japan. We had been their #1 trading partner up to this point. And the United States decides that we're going to cut off all trade with them, cut off their oil supply, all of those things. And Japan believed that they really had very little to lose. So they come in and they attack Pearl Harbor, right? Here's one of the images of their great success. It's a sneak attack. They come in and attack the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, sinking many American ships on December 7th, 1941. and finally getting the United States to declare war. And again, in this module, I've got a link to FDR's declaration of war. So it's December 7th, 1941, and the United States is finally at war. I'm going to pause this video, stop this video so they don't get too long, and then we'll move into the next one. So we're finally at war.